Everyone, and welcome to session 1B. This is our facilitating access track, and in this session we'll be talking about housing, landlords, and systems. My name is Kristen King, and I'm your producer for this session. I do want to let you know this event is being recorded. The views, opinions, and content expressed in this presentation and discussion do not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, or policies of the Center for Mental Health Services, the Center for Substance Abuse Treatment, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. With that, now I'm going to open up the line for our moderator, Sherry Downing. Sherry is going to be leading us in this session, and now I'm going to turn it over to you, Sherry.
Thanks, Kristen. Welcome, everyone. I am so excited about this session on housing, landlords, and systems. Housing is really one of the keystone resources for helping people coming out of homelessness and who have serious mental illnesses, substance use disorders, or co-occurring disorders. And we know that housing is key to recovery. We also know that housing, particularly affordable housing, is a deeply oversubscribed resource and can be super hard for the people that we serve every day to access because of multiple vulnerabilities and historical issues. So we've got two of the best people in the country here to talk to you today about housing. We have Denton, MED, who is a Housing First Permanent Supportive Housing expert and the principal and founder of Denton and Associates. And Ms. Denton has more than 40 years of experience assisting organizations, communities, and states on community integration for people with disabilities. She's an expert on housing issues for people with disabilities and people who are coming out of homelessness. And she helps providers and communities create successful housing efforts and is really good at linking people with disabilities to the resources they need to choose, get, and keep housing. She works with advocates and other key players on needed policy improvements and resource allocations, streamlining access to existing housing in communities, and expanding affordable housing resources. She also played a leadership role in developing SAMHSA's Permanent Supportive Housing Evidence-Based Practice Toolkit, so that PSH Toolkit. We also have Gregg Shin joining us. Gregg is coming to us from Oklahoma. He is an MSW and LSW admin, president and owner of Creative Housing Solutions, and the associate director and Chief Housing Officer of the Mental Health Association in Oklahoma. Mr. Shin has 30 years of experience in mental health and community planning and began his career working in psychiatric hospitals and doing street outreach in Lower Manhattan. He received his MSW from New York University in 1993, and until 2001 he directed a homeless shelter for people with mental illnesses on Wall Street. Since 2001, Mr. Shin has been Associate Director and Chief Housing Officer for Mental Health Association of Oklahoma, overseeing a portfolio of affordable housing that encompasses more than 1,500 units at 25 locations. I've seen some of those just as an aside, and they are amazing and beautiful, very livable units. The model provides housing and supports for ending and preventing homelessness for people with mental illnesses and co-occurring substance use disorders. And since 2011, he has consulted for AHP and SAMHSA, helped to develop products related to recovery from homelessness and housing first and permanent supportive housing, and has conducted national webinars. His firm, Creative Housing Solutions, provides assistance to communities focusing on data-driven solutions for ending homelessness. CSH, his firm, has published 3 economic impact studies, including the cost of long-term homelessness in Central Florida. Mr. Shin is also chair of the Oklahoma Governor's Interagency Council on Homelessness and immediate past president of the Oklahoma Coalition for Affordable Housing. So I think we've established that these speakers have amazing credentials to speak today about housing and how to access housing for people that we serve. So the agenda is, and we'll start the conversation, and Gregg will follow up. Then we'll have time at the end for question and answers. So please do put your questions in the question box, and we will be monitoring those. And then we'll have a very brief closing. So learning objectives for this session will include understanding the housing first approach and differentiating it from other approaches, understanding the key elements of successful landlord outreach, defining the coordinated entry systems, which are an important piece of the puzzle, and explaining at least 2 expected outcomes from a high fidelity approach. With that, I would just like you to tell us, A, where you're coming from. Welcome. I'm coming in today from Helena, Montana. And I would like to know what you're hoping to get out of this session. What will make it time well spent for you? So if you could take a moment and type into the box. I see we've got Idaho and Florida and Baltimore and New Hampshire and Burlington, Vermont, and the list is getting longer and longer. All right. With that, I am going to hand it over to Ann Denton. My friend, it's all yours.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I was able to attend this morning's sessions and just am very impressed with the high quality and the level, the comprehensive approach of this virtual summit. I think it's offering an excellent resource for people out there, and I know that we have many participants. So it was. I just wanted to take a few minutes and frame what Gregg and I are going to talk about, and Gregg is going to chime in as he sees fit. But when this morning in the opening plenary, Nan really gave us a sharp analysis of many factors around homelessness, but what is most important for this workshop, I think, is the analysis of the key market issues. Those market issues have not changed in the many years that I've been doing this, which is that we do not have enough housing that's affordable for people on an SSI level income. And for people who are exiting homelessness and who may have no income, it's even more daunting. Dennis Culhane also talked about people the population is aging. He also talked a bit about the housing markets and gave us information about where housing is least affordable, we have the largest problems. So I think all of that is really good for our session here. The other thing that I watched this morning was I looked at the chat as it came in, and I saw everything from, sort of the sort of a grim analysis of all the barriers in front of us as we try to access housing, and a little bit of, oh Lord, it's so hard, and this is very hard to do. And I want to acknowledge and recognize that this is not easy. But I also saw in the chat, and certainly we're going to hear a successful example from Gregg, I saw a lot of success and a lot of hope. So I just want to start by saying what Gregg and I are going to bring you is we're going to reflect the comprehensive approach that Nan gave us. We're going to talk about any community that's going to do something serious about housing is going to be doing several things. One is they're going to really do an effective outreach to access the housing that's already available in your community and that is theoretically affordable. That includes vouchers, that includes landlord outreach, all that we're going to talk about. The other thing that needs to happen is you need to influence policy and influence the money that funds development and influence development. We don't have enough housing. We're going to talk about that. I was really intrigued by Nan's comment about creative options that are not development, so shared housing, other kinds of approaches. The final thing that I think Gregg is the expert on is we cannot do this alone. We really need to have owners and landlords. We need to have local and state decision makers, developers, the housing industry, a host of partners. So how we're going to structure this is I'm going to talk first about a little bit about accessing the housing that we already have. And then Gregg is going to talk about partners, development, and whatever Gregg wants. Gregg, do you have anything you want to add?
No, but thank you, Ann, and I welcome everybody. I'm so glad to be here today. And I agree. I did not listen to Nan and Dennis earlier today. I've heard them both speak previously, and of course they're correct about the analysis of the current market conditions, which overall is we have been behind with unit production for affordable housing. We've been behind for decades. We're still behind. And in many cases, we're falling further behind meeting the market demand for affordable housing of vulnerable populations, including the homeless or people just at risk of homelessness, or even low-income working families. So given that, we do need to maximize our partnerships and our business relationships across both the public and the private sector to maximize the resources that we do have available, and we're going to try to speak to that today and how can you do that. So how can we get the most out of the environment that we're currently working in, and I hope that you can take home some tips for doing that in your community today.
All right, thank you, Gregg. So as I said, I'm going to start by talking about really doing everything you can to access the housing that you have in your community. And so most communities have an existing inventory of housing that is already, as I said earlier, theoretically affordable. So you've got subsidized housing in your community. You've got housing units that may have been created or controlled by nonprofit developers, the local behavioral health system, the local continuum of care, other special populations. But you have an inventory in your community of housing that has already been subsidized or somehow otherwise assisted so that it is below market rate. We also have a whole host of private property that's controlled by landlords and property management companies, and part of what I'm going to talk about here is how to access or how to do a better job of reaching out to those people. Agencies really need to be active players in the local and state housing arenas. Gregg will talk a little bit more about that. But what happens is we're competing against a housing market that is so oversubscribed. That was the word that Sherry used. I know in my community and in many communities, people who are working full-time minimum wage jobs or working multiple minimum wage jobs still cannot afford to live here. So people who are on exiting homelessness or on an SSI income are competing for the very few resources that are in our communities and not competing effectively unless we help them. So I would remind people on this call that people who are on SSI and people who have no income are in HUD's or in the housing industry's extremely low income category. That is relevant to this conversation because when we talk about funding that has supported units that are in your community, they're going to be targeted to different levels of income. So I just want to do a quick review for people in the audience about some of the major sources of funding for affordable housing. And that is because you cannot access these resources unless you know they're there. So I'm going to look briefly at HUD, USDA, and tax credits. There are lots and lots of other things going on in communities, and I encourage you to do that, to take a really strong look And if you want help doing that, give Gregg or me a call. Anyway, the resources that you that are in your community already offer two sets of opportunities. At the direct service level, again, this is not easy. People need to pursue access to the housing you already have. That includes the landlord-owner outreach and tenant support. We heard in session 1A all about different kinds of tenant support that are that seem to be creative and effective, and they all require intensive effort. The second place where resources that are already in your community offer an opportunity is to be in the planning meetings for how the dollars are going to be spent in your community. That's for vouchers, that's for Continuum of Care dollars, for every kind of housing funding that's coming to your community. You need to be at the table. And you really want to advocate for a fair share. I would never say, give me 100% of the resources for people exiting homelessness. There's too much need. But I would say, give me a fair share. And again, I wanted to emphasize that it takes work. So this is a quick summary of where you can find information about your public housing authorities, where you can find information about the consolidated plan for your community, and where you can find HUD's multifamily inventory. These are all HUD resources here, and they're not the only HUD resources that are out there. These are just the major ones. So again, if you click on these links, what you'll find is it'll take you to where you can actually get information. And the HUD multifamily inventory is one of my favorites because you click on that, click on your state, and you get an actual property listing. So what does your staff do with that? That's where the work starts. You have to start reaching out individually to owners, landlords, property management, and start making those connections. Other HUD programs besides the one listed on the previous slides are VASH, the Veterans Affairs Supportive Housing, HUD's 811 program, and the mainstream vouchers. Those of you who don't know about the mainstream vouchers, there's actually a competition out right now. Housing authorities can apply for mainstream vouchers, and those are vouchers that come in, they're in their own pipeline, or they're on their own list, and it's for people with disabilities. So the other resource that I really think it's important to mention is so much of our country is rural. When Kristen Yavorski was talking about her state, she's saying they have everything from around the D.C. area to Appalachia. And so those of us who are in big states or in states with that kind of mix, I think it's important to look at USDA. USDA has developed units. They offer a wide variety of programs that I don't have listed here, home ownership. They do all sorts of community development type funding. But this link on this slide will take you to a resource that will show, again, actual units. So you'll be able to click on your state, click on the county that you want to see, and if units have been developed in that county, a list will come up. Then you can click on that unit. Again, this is just the first step. Knowing where the units are gives your staff the power, or gives you as the chief manager the power to go out and create those relationships. The last one that I wanted to give some quick information about is low-income housing tax credits. These are, the tax credit program is probably the best subsidy, the largest subsidy for the development of affordable housing in that's accessible to us. And so what happens is the low-income housing tax credit, which is controlled by your state housing agency, develops units that are below market rate. They're going to be, some of the units developed in a tax credit property are going to be available to people who are making about half the median family income in your community. But none of them, typically, none of them are targeted to households at extremely low income, which is 30% of the median in your community. And that's where people on SSI typically are. And of course, somebody exiting homelessness with no income is also in that category. So why is this important? If it's not affordable to people on SSI, why are we even talking about it? And the reason we're talking about it is that when combined with the voucher program, they do become affordable, and they're usually fairly high quality properties. They're not they're usually very well done. Here is a slide that gives you a link to the database of tax credit properties that HUD maintains, and then depending on where state you're in, your housing finance agency may also have a list of actual properties. So again, the task becomes reaching out to landlords, reaching out to property managers, and Gregg will talk about how you can do that in cooperation with others. So that is a very, very, very quick overview of some basic resources. And again, the opportunities are twofold. One is to do the very best job you can to reach out to landlords, gain access, create relationships, shake the tree, right, as I say when I train on this. The other opportunity is to be at the table when people are talking about how they're going to spend these resources. Several states have made really significant and beneficial changes to their tax credit programs, and North Carolina's one, Louisiana's another one, where the way that their tax credit dollars can be used is beneficial, and it creates additional units for people at extremely low incomes, what they call deeply affordable units, or it creates a larger number of accessible units. So there's two opportunities. One is beat the door down for these landlords, and two, be at the table when people are making decisions. So I've talked a couple of times about property owners and landlords, and I just want to spend a few minutes reminding people of or introducing people to the idea of what can you do to get landlords to work with you. And I would also say that the United States Interagency Council on Homelessness has a suite of products on their website all about landlord outreach and engagement. Let's start though with a quick review of what do landlords want. Well, they want you to they want the tenant to pay the rent on time. They want the tenant to not destroy the property, and they want the tenant to not create a problem in the community of renters. And so all of those things are both opportunities and barriers. So the payment of rent becomes a little bit of a concern if the person only has a small amount of income. So the barrier is a common standard is 2.5, that this household should make 2.5 or 3 times the rent in income. And someone on SSI is not going to be able to do that. The other thing about property condition is, as we all know, this is a two-way street. So the landlord also has to put together, they have to have a habitable unit. Okay. The other landlord concern is no disruptions. I really like this cartoon. The household on the left looks like my household, which is noisy and lots of animals and barking, and then next door neighbors are putting their hands over their ears. We really are looking at these things are barriers in that sometimes a landlord may have had experience with somebody who, quote unquote, had a mental illness, or is one of those people, and then now they don't want to rent anymore because they're concerned that they're not going to get the support from your team that they need to help the person stay in housing. So this is a HUD resource. Again, there's a link in the resource slide at the end that talks about how you engage landlords around rent. So one of the things that can happen is you can search for and bring qualified tenants. That means you've already helped them obtain financial assistance that makes them look like they have the right amount of income for the rent. You can also do things like offer a guarantee of paid rent for a certain period of time if the tenants don't pay. You also can pre-qualify tenants. The goal here is to make it easy for landlords to say yes. Another set of strategies that are more at the system level are master leasing, which Gregg might be talking about, co-signing leases with people, and using payee programs, but only for paying the rent. There was a question in the chat box. What's a mitigation fund? I saw that before I stopped looking at chat. I didn't want to be distracted. But a risk mitigation fund is defined here, and it really is having a fund at your agency level or at your community level that supports landlords, that provides them with funding under specific conditions. So if somebody moves out before the end of their lease period, it may cover costs associated with making that unit ready for the next tenant. Anyway, if you want know more about that, the National Alliance to End Homelessness has products and other resources available on that. So landlord engages on disruption. The number one thing we can do is be available. Landlords have to have a centralized place to call. You gotta respond. You can't ignore it. And then supporting tenants and being good tenants. Meeting the requirements of their lease. And then also looking at things like reaching out to first responders. Okay, here's the core components of an effective landlord engagement program. This is from USICH, risk mitigation funds, mediation, flexible funds, landlord and tenant engagement. So what I've done, I think, is set the stage for Gregg to talk to you about the work that he's done over the years. And before I let him have it, which he can have in 30 seconds, I want to say we can do this. We can do this. We heard examples from state this morning. Kristen, we're going to hear something from Gregg. All of these things are possible. All right, Gregg, you're on.
Thank you so much, Ann, and that was a really great overview. And I would like to say that I think that you touched on a lot of great resources. I did see a lot of questions coming across in the chat box asking for the resources and the links that we were providing that Ann just talked about. So those will all be made available to you. Everybody can get a copy of those resources, and the slides will be available so that everybody can follow up on those resources. I know sometimes it's hard to keep up while you're listening and you're entering information in the chat box. So again, I just want to thank everybody for having me here. And I want to start by talking about what are the factors that contribute to homelessness. Well, one of our national colleagues who consults, his name is Mark Dones, and he started the Supporting Anti-Racist Communities Initiative, what they call SPARK. And he has a really great statement that I just love to share this, where he says, homelessness is a multi-sector failure. There is no single point of entry into a solution space. The solution space is re-engineering how the sectors interact with each other. And so that's really kind of a lofty statement, but it's true, is the streams, the inflow into what causes homelessness goes across sectors. It's across health and business, all economic factors, personal characteristics that individuals may have, what happens to families, what happens to veterans. There are so many things that contribute to homelessness, and because the streams going into homelessness come from all over the place, the solutions must also be derived from multi-sector approaches where we derive resources and solutions coming from all over the place. So I really love how Mark talks about that. And so in order to come up with multi-sector solutions, I like to talk about the 3 Ps, and that is provide, prevent, and preserve. So if you're going to end and prevent homelessness in your community through community planning and neighborhood stabilization practices, you need to think about providing direct access for those people that are literally experiencing homelessness right now. You need to try to prevent additional homelessness, and you need to preserve the affordable housing stock that already does exist in the community, which Ann was making reference to. How do you access what's already there? And so I could even add a fourth, which would be produce. How do we produce additional affordable housing? But it's all about the 3 Ps, and it takes a multi-sector approach to carry out that practice. So why do we want to try to avoid homelessness? The economic impacts, the toll that it takes on our society is really of a magnitude that is almost difficult to calculate. But there have been a number of cost studies that have been completed over the last couple of decades, including the one that I did here in Central Florida, which was #1 in chronic homelessness in the country at the time, where we've been able to measure the cost differential between providing housing plus services compared to allowing homelessness to continue to exist. And when you look at chronic homelessness, which is the longest term, most disabled homeless population, and then you look at their utilization rates across all systems like the hospital system, incarceration, emergency responses, shelter bed usage, and so forth, you see that allowing homelessness to exist and people going in and out of homelessness, cycling through all these systems nonstop, is much more expensive than creating the housing and the services provided to them. And you can do the math, and you can map out what that difference is and then project out what would be the savings in your community. So many of these cost studies have been done, and the economic impacts are massive. So the public costs that could be avoided, along with the resources that are leveraged back to the community through affordable housing development, not to mention the economic impacts of the jobs created when you're building out the affordable housing, jobs created in the private sector. It's an economic formula that really shows that the plan to end homelessness in your community is an economic driver that helps solve the problem. And so the methodology that we want to focus on here is Housing First. I'm sure many of you have heard of Housing First. Housing First was developed by Sam Simbaris a couple of decades ago, and when Sam started Pathways to Housing, he discussed what the Housing First approach is, and it's a service intervention that provides immediate access to permanent housing and supportive services, and this is the key part. It's based on a philosophy of client choice, and participants are not required to participate in treatment or attain a period of sobriety in order to obtain housing. And that really flipped the model on its head. When I was operating an emergency shelter in New York City for people with mental illnesses, in fact, what was required at the time was that people become psychiatrically, medically, financially, and socially stabilized before they could move into the community residence housing models that were in existence at the time. They did not practice Housing First. And Sam depicts that with this staircase where he shows that, well, you have to get your shelter bed, you have to get into transitional housing, and when you're stabilizing all along the way, then maybe you'll be housing ready to move into permanent housing. And what we know is that Housing First with direct placement from the shelter, from the street, directly into permanent housing, bypasses all those steps. And that's where people can begin to recover with self-directed and self-selected services for their individualized service plan so that they can get back into stability, back into recovery, back on the road to economic inclusion in the community, back into the job market or whatever their goals may be for themselves. And so that's what the Housing First approach is all about. And so this has been widely adopted across the world right now. And there is Housing First evaluation models going on all over the world, not just in the United States. The Canada and the European Union, some of the European countries have made massive investments on a national level where they've actually, like in Finland, they've actually been able to make investments on a national level of such a magnitude that they've been virtually able to eliminate homelessness in their country. Of course, that's much more challenging in the United States where we have hundreds of millions of people, but still there's a lot of fidelity review going on around the globe, and I want you to get a look at the fact that this is an evidence-based practice and it's being evaluated for its outcomes all across the world. And so the whole idea is that we have a belief that recovery is possible, reintegration into the community for people that were formerly homeless, with disabilities, with mental illnesses, with substance use disorders, with physical disabilities, with other challenges, that they can in fact succeed by getting back into the housing market, living in places that are safe, decent, and affordable, with permanent housing in good neighborhoods, with access to local amenities and transportation, where they can live stigma-free alongside everyone else in the community, fully integrated as participating citizens in our community. And that's what the Housing First model helps achieve. So one of the things that the Mental Health Association, which is the nonprofit that I work for, one of the things that we really focus on is what we call a mixed income and mixed population model. And this is really an interesting approach, and it's very effective because it's self-sustaining, because when you have a large number of units that are for market rate renters that can pay affordable rents, you'll make a net operating income off of the affordable units that you rent to lower or moderate income working families that need their affordable housing preserved in the community. And the net operating income from those units can help to underwrite or subsidize the below market rents that you're offering through the Housing First model in the permanent supportive housing units. And when we look at the number of units that the Mental Health Association has, over 1,500 units, we see that 26% is dedicated to Housing First for people experiencing homelessness, and there's about 74% for low to mod income working households, workforce housing. 13% of the portfolio is dedicated to veterans, and we also have diversion programs like mental health court and recovery-based programs where people that are in diversion programs also get access to some of our units. And if they don't have a landlord that will rent to those people right now, they would then be the next families that are in the homeless arena. So we want to prevent additional homelessness by working with homeless prevention programs. So the way that we want to do this is a low-density scattered site approach. And all communities, all neighborhoods are a part of the solution. And this is very important because we don't want to overweight any one neighborhood or any one part of a community towards high concentrations of poverty or disability. So the mixed income, mixed population model and a low-density scattered site plan says that it's not in one county, it's not in just one city, it's not one neighborhood, and it's not one organization that are helping create the access. In fact, you need multiple locations across a metropolitan area, and so we have done this by working with some large property management companies in both Oklahoma City and in Tulsa in Oklahoma. And in Oklahoma City, we work with Price Edwards and Company. They're one of the largest property management companies in the state. And the Mental Health Association has its own property management company, which we have built through our nonprofit organization. And then we partner with Price Edwards. And the advanced access to the existing market that Price Edwards has helps us, helps our organization, and helps our client base gain access to a much larger market than our small nonprofit could ever create by itself. So we have 151 scattered site units in different neighborhoods across Oklahoma City, and in Tulsa, where we've been in business for much longer, we have nearly 1,500 units in 22 different locations in 16 different neighborhoods. So the idea is by creating broad access across the community, you want to be able to create access into different types, styles, and locations of housing. Like I said before, you want to be located to public transportation, jobs, grocery stores, goods and services, because when you create many locations or access points across the community, you go back to the core principle of housing first, which is client choice. You want people to have a choice in where they live in the community with close access to the amenities that they may want and they may choose for them or for their family members to live near. And the more choice that you provide for people, the better the outcomes. And we know that over time, with the housing first fidelity model, you're going to succeed 80 or 90% of the time if you create broad access with client choice at the center of what you're trying to do. Again, here we have our property management partnerships, and this also talks about the economic impacts. Housing, affordable housing development, preservation of affordable housing, creating access to affordable housing is also a big business. And so these business relationships, they further our partnerships in the community, they create jobs with the maintenance and the ongoing operations of the affordable housing portfolio that we have all across the state. Here again we see the analysis of the unit mix, and this is what we call our density rates. We try to monitor and take a measure of how many people are living in of what different type, how many households of each type are living across our portfolio. And we know that by doing this, over time, we are even, as we build out our portfolio, we're even having more access for women and children than ever before. In fact, in 2018, for the very first time, we served more women than men for the first time in our portfolio, even while we know that chronic homelessness is weighted heavily towards single adult males. But with our mixed income and mixed population portfolio, we're serving more women and children than ever that would be at risk of homelessness if we do not create the affordable housing access. And we also know, as I mentioned, that with Fidelity to Housing First, for over 20 years we've achieved a retention rate above 90% year over year, with some programs as high as 98% housing retention rates. So now, once you've got your Housing First model in place and you've identified your resources, you're working with property management companies, and you're trying to create access, you're going to try to put in place the best practice that HUD has really instructed all of our continuums of care to be involved in, and that's the coordinated entry system. So how do we understand all of these various subpopulations that need access to the Housing First model, to the permanent supportive housing, to the affordable housing, plus services in all these locations that you can identify across your city? And the way that you're going to do that is through a coordinated entry. And what I'm saying is you need to understand what is the market demand from each of these various subpopulations, and what types, styles, and locations of housing do you have access to meet the market demand of the various homeless populations that you're trying to serve, who are trying to get out of homelessness. And so you can read HUD's definition of coordinated entry here. So when you look at the subpopulations, you're going to try to determine who is it that's flowing into homelessness in your system, who is disabled and experiencing chronically homeless, or who simply needs rapid access back into the housing market. And those can be very different populations, like if you're looking youth aging out of foster care into homelessness, or veterans that are entering homelessness, or chronically homeless families or adults that have serious ongoing disabilities that really need permanent supportive housing, and they're going to need ongoing housing and support services, versus a family it's an economic situation, a family lost a job, they got evicted, they need rapid access back to the housing market, they're still employable, they still may have ties to the community, so rapid rehousing may be a much more effective intervention through the coordinated entry system. That family may not need permanent supportive housing. We know that permanent supportive housing isn't cheap. We do know it's a lot less expensive than allowing homelessness to exist in your community, but we also have a limited number of permanent supportive housing units, so we want to target those permanent supportive housing interventions to the people that are the most vulnerable, that really do need those interventions, and other subpopulations of the homeless can get into other intervention models. But the idea behind coordinated entry is that you're identifying the partners, you're identifying the funding streams, you're all working together, and you're analyzing the subpopulations flowing into homelessness and then trying to get ahead of that flow for diversion and prevention, or say for discharge planning from the county jail or from the hospital system, where are people exiting into homelessness? That's the idea behind coordinated entry. And so sometimes communities have really worked together to map out visually what does coordinated entry look like. So I'm going to show a couple examples of what that looks like. One of those is here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. The Community Service Council has mapped out what their coordinated entry system looks like. It's a visual depiction of coordinated entry, and it's called All Doors Open. And you can see here that you're looking at the entire system. Who is it that's coming into homelessness? What are the various subpopulations? You can see youth up there. You can see domestic violence. You can see the day shelter for the homeless population. And then where are people getting access back into the market through homeless diversion programs, prevention programs, and crisis services. So it's a roadmap. Coordinated entry represents a roadmap of access to the various resources in your community. Another one that I really like is the United Way of Greater Los Angeles, and here on their depiction of the coordinated entry system, I love their language. What they're going to do is they're going to get to know every single individual, every veteran, every homeless family that they can identify in their community. They'll do an assessment, and then once those individuals are assessed on which pathway they would go into, then they would help that individual, help that family navigate the process and connect them with the housing and supports that they need. Whatever that avenue is to meet the individualized, unique needs of that family, of that veteran, of that young adult, of that chronically homeless individual, and then help them navigate that system back into the housing market. So when we're looking at the available resources for coordinated entry, we want to identify the partners in the community and the funding streams that we can access. That includes being very involved in your local continuum of care. Those of you that are out there that are service providers may be very well aware of your local continuum of care process, but if you're not, you need to be very, very integrated into the local continuum of care, because they manage all the resources that come from HUD for the homeless assistance programs. And that includes transitional housing, which usually has up to 24-month stays, rapid rehousing, which averages about a 6-month stay. So in those cases, you're looking at shorter-term subsidies and shorter-term supportive services, including case management or mental health services or employment services or whatever, but they're shorter-term duration, and then people can stabilize in the community, versus permanent supportive housing, which also passes through the continuum of care. So you want to be involved in the continuum of care. But Ann earlier also referenced the consolidated planning process. And the consolidated planning process takes place at the city level or the county level or the state level, and they also marshal the other HUD resources, which includes the Emergency Solutions Grant. Homeless prevention programs for eviction prevention and diversion can be funded through ESG monies. Emergency shelter beds can be funded through ESG, and then also rapid rehousing programs. So when you look at the ESG programs or Community Development Block Grant or Housing for Persons with AIDS, these programs pass through the jurisdictions that are at the city, the county, and the state level. So together with your Continuum of Care and your state consolidated plan resources, you need to be highly aware of what all the resources that you have are that can help people in the coordinated entry system. It can be a bit overwhelming, but the only way to get involved is to jump in there, make sure your organization is represented at the table, and that you're advocating for the subpopulations that your organization is serving. So finally, we want to take a look at prioritization. So with the coordinated entry process, it's not only just that everybody needs to partner together to create that roadmap of the existing resources and learn how to partner to help the clients you're serving access the available subsidies and the housing resources that are available, but also who are we going to prioritize. So through the prioritization process, we really have a best practice now, which is called establishing the by name list in your community. So on the veteran by name list, or on the youth by name list, or on the family by name list, or on the chronic homeless by name list, you will have all the names of the known individuals in your community that you can identify through your street outreach programs, through your emergency shelter programs, through your United Way, through your 211 that you may have in your community, and identifying who are these people that need emergency assistance, who is unsheltered, who is sheltered, who has a serious mental illness, who is really in emergency crisis or the most vulnerable and literally at the risk of death right now. So this is why we have vulnerability indexes that help prioritize. One of the most frequently utilized is the Vulnerability Index Service Prioritization Decision Assistance Tool, developed by Ian DeYoung of Org Code Consulting, and the VI SPDAT is widely adopted, and there are some other vulnerability index tools that are widely adopted, and that helps determine people's vulnerability or what risk are they or what category of housing should they go into when you're looking at your coordinated entry system. So it helps determine disability, it helps people go up the wait list for priority. The more vulnerable you are, the higher your score. The longer your length of homelessness, the higher your score is going to be. So the longer you've been homeless, the more disabled and vulnerable and at risk you are, the higher you will be on the wait list, and then you should be at or nearing the top of the next family or individual that is ready to move into the next unit. And so these wait lists are established at the community level. You need to be involved, making sure that your clients are getting on these by name wait lists so that the resources that can be accessed by the clients that you serve, your target populations are prioritized through the local coordinated entry system. And it all leads to accessing housing more efficiently, more quickly. Shortening the length of time homeless is the goal here. How do we get rapid access back into the housing market? It's a very challenging environment, as Ann talked about, but it is achievable, and the more that we all work together, partnering together across the community, determining prioritization through coordinated entry system, the faster we can house our veterans that are homeless, our disabled individuals that are homeless, our youth that are homeless, and so forth. So what have we learned here today? We've learned that fidelity is a big deal, that client choice really matters, that it's really important to have fidelity to Housing First and permanent supportive housing, and that client choice, flexible support services that are self-directed and self-selected, different type styles and locations of housing in different neighborhoods, that all leads to better outcomes, and you really should be achieving above 80 to 90% or above housing retention rates. And if you're not, then you need to check fidelity to your model that you're implementing. So that those are the known outcomes of Housing First, are the retention rates and the reintegration into the community. And we know that intentional planning can create access for many different subpopulations experiencing homelessness. And we know that our partners can be national funders, they can be state funders, county funders, city funders, and private sector funders, including foundations and corporate sector that can be solutions to the problems. like I said, different types, styles, and locations of housing, creates self-determination and choice, and we can build with business partners, community partners, property management companies to create greater access across an entire state or community, and that we need to scale to meet the market demand of the various subpopulations that we're trying to serve. We know that coordinated entry works to help people enter and access the resources that we do have as quickly and efficiently as possible, and we also know for quality of life that everybody wins when homelessness is decreased. The quality of life for the homeless individual or family is increased. The quality of life for business in the community is increased. The quality of life for neighborhoods, for families, for stability in our community is increased. Everybody wins when homelessness is decreased. So I just want to thank everybody for their time today. And we do have some links to our important resources, and we'll take any questions that you have now.
Right. Well, Gregg, before we do that, you mentioned a couple of times in your presentation about fidelity, and I thought we might want to talk just for a second back and forth about how people can look at where do they find this fidelity for housing first or permanent supportive housing.
Sure. So you can go to the SAMHSA store, and you can access for free the permanent supportive housing toolkit that's available at the SAMHSA store. I think we can put that link up for you right now. And there you can find out about development of affordable housing, about fidelity to permanent supportive housing, and it gives you a broad overview. And you can also contact us if you would like resources regarding how to get a fidelity review to your model. Also, I want to say that SAMHSA has funded many grants across the country over many years now, including the CABI grants, the grants out of the Center for Mental Health Services and CSAT, and these grants all have evaluated outcomes, which many providers across the country, other panelists here in the Homeless Summit have been involved in those SAMHSA grants, and fidelity is part of a review of every one of those grantees and the outcomes of their models.
Right. The other thing I would just add one more thing to that. You know, if people on the phone are system administrators or state people, and if providers are operating programs to fidelity, you get a set of predictable outcomes. Nan this morning said 93% retention rate with people who have significant barriers to housing, not the easy people. People who have significant barriers, a 93% retention rate is very good. The other thing that I would suggest, if you're in that category, administrator or state person, look at the way Kristen Yavorsky and the state of Virginia, the Commonwealth of Virginia, are tracking their outcomes. Go back and look at her slides, because she's really doing a good data run and good monitoring of how they're performing.
Yes, and SAMHSA also continues to do Housing First Fidelity reviews with his organization Pathways Housing First. So there are many technical assistance providers out there. You can go to usich.gov as well. You can go to HUD.gov, and you can look at the resources that are out there and how fidelity is ranked and reviewed. So technical assistance is available, and it really does help to guide what your Housing First model looks like in your community. And as I said earlier, if you're not achieving at least 80%, then you're kind of missing some of the steps somewhere with basic fidelity. Above 90% is regularly achieved, just as Nan was speaking about earlier. It is very it's very known and predictable outcomes, so the return on investment is known. The goal here is taking the intervention to scale.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, thanks, Gregg. So, Sherry, do you have questions for Gregg and me?
Oh, I do. I absolutely have a lot of questions for you and Gregg. So thank you both for that presentation. It was incredibly helpful. Housing is near and dear to my heart. And I know you're on the Board of Commissioners for your Public Housing Authority. I serve on mine as well. We've both, and Gregg as well, have done a lot of work on housing over the years. So This is important stuff. So here's a question that I'd like both of you to tackle. So maybe, Ann, you can take it first, and then Greg, you can follow. So landlords have to protect their investments and be able to make a living. We understand that. But could you speak to the issue of high-risk renters and difficulty pricing those folks? People with a history of evictions, for example, or criminal backgrounds. Also, most places require background checks that are costly, and that is passed on to potential renters. So what can be done to address some of these barriers?
I'd like to start with that.
Sure.
Earlier, Ann referenced master leasing. So we have done housing first with properties that we have acquired, we have redeveloped, or with new construction affordable housing locations that we have built, but we also master lease with other landlords and property management companies across the state of Oklahoma. And so with master leasing, what you do is you bring to the table the guaranteed on-time rental payment, and you can help put down the security deposits that are required that can't be paid for by the vulnerable population that you're housing. And you can also guarantee that you'll have a frequency of site visits. You'll be in regular contact with the landlord or the property management company. As Ann said, you'll be very responsive. And you can also help pay for any damages that may be created to the unit. Another real advantage of master leasing is that a lot of times you can get units that are all bills paid, because individuals experiencing long-term homelessness have bad credit, they can't open utility accounts in their own names, and so when you can master lease in the name of your company, then you can mitigate all of those concerns. The utilities get paid, the rent gets paid on time, the contact is there with your organization to respond to the landlord. So I think that that's a really great vehicle to overcome some of those barriers.
And I would add, an answer to that question, that you do something at the system level like Greg's talking about, and that you have a risk mitigation fund. We need to work hard to make our tenants, our prospective tenants, attractive to landlords. And one of the ways that we do that is to have money to help offset any concerns about additional costs. The other thing that Gregg is talking about, in a master leasing contract, the organization that's doing the master leasing with landlords is assuming some portion of the risk. So that reassures landlords. Then finally, at the individual person level, there is a lot of material out there about how to do effective, reasonable accommodation requests. So anything that can be related to the disability can be the content of a reasonable accommodation request.
I would just like to tag on to that, although intensive case management services is not really the scope of this particular workshop, frequency of visit. How often are you meeting with the client in their home environment? What is the size of your caseload? Housing First Fidelity, permanent supportive housing fidelity, really giant caseloads lead to less frequency of face-to-face visits or on-site visits in the environment where the person that you're serving lives. And so the more often that you can lay your eyes on the environment that the person lives in, making home visits with your case management model, that mitigates risk right there. You know what's happening. Sometimes you can intervene earlier. You can talk to people. You can have the property management company talk to them. So sometimes there's ways to get ahead of that on the front end instead of always reacting in crisis mode after there's a problem.
Thank you both. That was really helpful. I have another question, and I'll leave it to you who would like to tackle it first. But this really speaks to fidelity, to reaching fidelity at base, because it's saying housing first is sensible, but voluntary services are difficult to work around to help someone maintain stable housing. Do you have suggestions as to the mode of encouragement with clients who have substance use disorders, mental health issues, or have been justice involved or entrenched in that arena due to the perceived necessity or affiliation. So I would say, you know, housing first really isn't housing only, and the services are critical. So can you speak to that a little bit? How do you get people to engage?
Well, I can take a shot at it.
Thanks, Dan.
I would say, and you know, if people who had listened to 1A, this is 1B, really those speakers were talking about effective services and supports, absolutely essential. Voluntarily services and supports means that we have to sell ourselves to our tenants. We have to be able to provide things that they think that they need. We also have to be skilled in things like motivational interviewing. We need to have a good clinical leadership. And I would say it's very important to help people do their own recovery work using things like wellness recovery action plans or SAMHSA's illness management recovery.
Yes. Yes, and so I also am a huge believer in peer support and having recovery support specialists embedded on your teams, which I'll speak a little bit more about that in our roundtable discussion on workforce development. But I think that it's all about walking the journey of recovery with people. It's not about doing something for people. You have to really listen. It's what is your listening stance, adopting motivational interviewing techniques as Ann is talking about, making sure that you have peer support specialists that are part of your team that can identify, that you can reflect back. You're really listening to what it is that the person wants. And in the end, they do have the right to refuse the treatment options that you do have. Most housing first models, the minimal expectation is that they just see their case manager at least once a week. So they don't have to really actively participate. But I think that the more engaged that you are with them on an ongoing frequent basis, the easier that these conversations get. The further and further away from in time, the less frequent you see them, the harder it gets, and you don't know what's going on. So I still go back to frequency of visit and face-to-face contact.
Thank you both.
Got any more?
I'm having a hard... Yeah, we've got dozens more. That's the trouble. We've got 35 seconds left and many, many more questions. So I guess what I'm going to do instead of direct a question is say, oh, actually, I misread that. We've got 6 minutes and 20 seconds left, so we can take another question. All right, apologies there. So here's a question that both of you will be able to answer. In what ways can low-income applicants with rental barriers become more competitive in a rent-saturated market, in a renter-saturated market? So what can I do if I'm a low-income renter to make myself more competitive?
So it is very difficult when we know that landlords out there can get more than fair market rent for their unit. So for instance, what HUD publishes as the fair market rent in a given community in a zip code area, HUD publishes that and updates that all the time, but there are landlords out there that know that they can get more than the HUD fair market rent for that unit. And then if your client can only pay fair market rent, or your program is helping them pay fair market rent with whatever subsidy they're using, whether it's a voucher or whether it's a rental assistance program through the Continuum of Care or whatever it is, you're kind of not in a very challenging position. So I think that goes back to what Ann said. You really have to sell your service and the benefits of your service to the property management companies and the landlords in your community. There are some communities in the country that are much more challenged in this way, like Seattle or Los Angeles, where the rental competition is just so very, very difficult. But in a lot of other areas in the country, just guaranteeing that they're going to get the fair market rent, that you can put down the deposits, that you're there to stand behind the person and meet with them all the time, and that you're readily available to answer any calls or problems, that can be enough to get your clients to be seen as a really favorable population to be housed by most landlords in the community.
Thanks, Greg.
And
do you have anything to add?
Yeah, 10 seconds. I would say there's nothing better than knowing what it is landlords want and knowing what a qualified tenant looks like and helping to pre-qualify your people. So,
Yeah,
so when you're bringing them people, they learn to trust you, that you're bringing them people that they can rent to.
Yeah, how about listening to landlords too? We want to listen to our clients, but I think we want to listen to the landlords too.
Agreed.
Absolutely. All right, so here's a question that I think both of you can help with a little bit. So could you talk a little bit about how mayors and city councils can help promote affordable housing, the turnover for land for the benefit of the real estate industry and their capital investors often sort of outweigh the need for affordable housing for the people we're talking about. So that isn't exactly how the question is written, but I think what we're getting at is, you know, it can be really complicated to balance the needs of people who are really interested in making money and people who really need housing.
Well,
Right.
as I said before, go ahead, Ann.
There's no substitute for strong political leadership. So mayors and city councils can dictate policy. So they can dictate something like, we have an affordable housing bond program where we're going to spend, 25% of those dollars on developing units that are deeply affordable. There's no substitute for strong, effective political leadership. They can make almost anything happen. If you've got a recalcitrant bureaucracy in place, that may be the only way you can get it done. Greg, to you.
Yeah, so I really say that development of affordable housing is a nonpartisan issue. In that, as I said before, everyone wins when homelessness is decreased, and affordable housing production is a huge economic impact in the private sector. So as we produce more housing for greater access for homeless populations, the public sector costs that are avoided can be realized as we increase the access to the housing for the people that we serve, and that we're going to leverage these resources back to the community. So if the mayor or the county commissioners are advocating for, say, some kind of a land trust or for a housing trust fund or for some type of a municipal bond initiative to develop more affordable housing, then what you're going to get for every penny or for every dollar, it's very, very common to see $4 or $5 or $6 come back for every dollar that's contributed from the local tax base. So you're leveraging hundreds of millions of dollars back, and then on top of that, you're creating jobs through the affordable housing production. So what I say to get to a nonpartisan conversation with our political leadership at the national, state, county, or city level is, hey, look, nobody loses here. This is how many units of affordable housing we need. If we create this many units, we're going to save these public sector costs. We're going to leverage all these dollars back to our community, and we're going to create all these jobs. There is no political spectrum out there that doesn't agree with creating jobs through development of affordable housing. So that's a great way to get bipartisan support.